Good afternoon. Thank you for joining us. Well, politicians, business, and labor leaders are scrambling in reaction to Donald Trump's threat of a 25% tariff on Canadian goods. We'll hear from the BC Business Council, and we'll ask you for your reaction. How should Canada respond? Plus, gender-based violence is on the rise, and some groups want it to be declared an epidemic. We'll hear from the YWCA Metro Vancouver and ask you what are the solutions and supports you think are needed. I'm Michelle Elliott. Welcome to BC Today. Donald Trump's promise to impose a 25% tariff on goods coming from Canada and Mexico has sparked waves of reaction here. Now, Trump blamed an influx of drugs and migrants into the U.S. from both countries for his threat. The United States is BC's largest export partner, with energy, mineral metals, agriculture, and wood topping the list. This morning, Premier David Eby spoke at the BC Federation of Labor Convention, and he said a tariff would be devastating.
It's important to recognize a couple of things. One is that Canada is a major customer of United States businesses, just like we sell a lot of things to United States businesses. We buy more American stuff than France and China and Japan and the United Kingdom combined. So we are negotiating, I believe, from a position of strength. But also, Americans are dependent on what we produce here in Canada. We are one of the top exporters to the United States, and certainly they're our number one customer as well. We have more in common with Americans than what separates us.
Eby is meeting with Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, along with other premiers, tomorrow afternoon. We'd like to hear from you. What impact would a 25% tariff on Canadian goods have on BC? And how do you think Canada should respond? You can call us now, 1-800-825-5950, 604-669-3733. You can hit pound 690 on your cell phone. You can also email bctoday@cbc.ca. Joining me now is Laura Jones, CEO of the Business Council of BC. Good afternoon. Thanks for joining us.
Good afternoon.
How seriously are you taking this threat from Donald Trump a couple of months before he's even inaugurated?
I think we have to take this seriously while recognizing that Donald Trump negotiates this way. He makes big kind of statements that get people's attention. And I think we have to take it seriously, but we also have to recognize that there is some negotiating tactics at work here.
Okay, so given that, we see just this flurry of response from your organization, other business groups, politicians, premiers across the province have been addressing this. So we saw a phone call from between the Prime Minister Trudeau and Donald Trump last night. I mean, given all that flurry of reaction, what do you make of that? Is that how you see what another Trump administration will be?
Yeah, I think that we need to learn the lessons. I mean, we did a good job the first time we had to deal with a similar situation with the renegotiation of NAFTA, and we took a Team Canada approach. I think that's the right approach to take now. It's good that the Prime Minister is meeting with the premiers. It was good to hear that David Eby is out there talking about this as well, taking it seriously and making it a top priority. We need a Team Canada approach. That's not just the Prime Minister to the President. That's the premiers talking to governors and being out there expressing their concerns. And it also includes business leaders. Remember, there are a lot of Canadian businesses that work in the U.S. and they played a role in the first time we were negotiating NAFTA, and they have an important role to play now. Business association leads like myself also can do their part. So a Team Canada approach is really what's needed to address this very significant challenge. Again, we have to take it seriously. I mean, if it were to come to pass, it would absolutely be devastating. I don't think it will come to pass, but I think we need to take it seriously and make sure that we minimize, any additional tariffs for Canada would be problematic.
You don't think it will actually come to pass?
Well, I think we have the ingredients to take this in another direction. I think we need to reassure the incoming administration, the Trump incoming administration, that we intend to be good neighbors. There's always more work to be done to be a good neighbor, and we can do that work to secure our borders, which is also in our interests. So I think we can reassure. And then I think the second thing is we're already starting to do is to remind the Americans that this is a two-way street. There was a study done in the US that showed that the impact on US families would be serious tariffs, Canadian tariffs, or additional taxes on our products going in would be cost the American family about $2,600 a year. So there are implications for Americans as well in this negotiation.
Premier Eby made that point. He said this would be devastating for workers on both sides of the border. For yourself, which BC sectors would you be most concerned about?
I don't think you can pick sectors to be most concerned about, because the Trump administration isn't picking sectors. So,
But what would be hit hardest?
Well, we would have our biggest exports, energy. Forestry has already been devastated by the Americans' approach to tariffs. So that's another one to keep our eyes on. Would these be additional tariffs on top of the softwood lumber pieces of it? But we've got right across the board sectors would be impacted. We recently did a tour of a greenhouse facility in Abbotsford. They sell peppers. Those peppers go to the US. They would be impacted. So there are lots and lots of Canadian companies that would feel the impact of this.
My guest is Laura Jones, CEO of the Business Council of BC. We're taking your calls here on BC Today. What is your reaction to this threat from U.S. President-elect Donald Trump of 25% tariffs on Canadian goods going into the United States? He says these would end if the Canadian government would deal with the influx of drugs and migrants through the border. And so he's saying this is what's at stake is a 25% trade tariff. And so we're asking you what impact you think that might have, and how do you think Canada should respond? Our numbers are 1-800-825-5950, 604-669-3733. Now, Laura just touched on forestry. And of course, softwood lumber has been the subject of a lot of animosity with regard to trade between the United States and Canada. Chris is calling us from Cranbrook about softwood lumber. Hi, Chris.
Hello there, and thank you for taking my call.
Sure. And what are your thoughts about how this might impact softwood lumber?
Well, to put it bluntly, what happens if we shut off the taps? You know, like instead of sending like raw logs to the U.S., why don't they cut them up in British Columbia sawmills, like the ones that have been shut down? Mm-hmm. And then just shut off value-added lumber. Now, wouldn't that kind of, help the home building? Wouldn't the prices of lumber go down because there's a glut on the market?
So almost a retaliation, Chris? Almost in retaliation?
Well, yeah, in retaliation, just shut off the taps kind of thing.
Okay. Chris, thank you so much. Laura, softwood lumber has already seen tariffs even under the Biden administration. Does the forestry sector in BC even have the option here, given the hit that industry has taken?
The challenge with retaliatory measures is that they really can escalate and end up hurting more, hurting both sides. So that's kind of the lane we want to keep things out of, while I would suggest that it's still important to remind the Americans that they export a lot of their goods to Canada as well. So any kind of measure that they take, we would have to think about what that would mean for us. I think it would be dangerous to actually go there and start retaliating, because that also has very negative impacts. But, for 35 out of the 50 states, Canada is the biggest market, and for 45, I think, of the 50 states, we're the number 1 or 2 market. So the Americans do have something to lose in kind of a trade escalation, or I hate to use the word trade war, but they would have something to lose if they were to impose tariffs. They'd have to think about what our reaction to that might be. And so that's certainly, I think, going to be on the table. I definitely think it's important to be reminding Americans, particularly the border states. The government actually has some great fact sheets for every single state. And I was just looking at them, reminding myself about what's in them. And they actually go by district in the states where the exports to Canada go. And so I think that's a really great tool, and it's at Canada to Connect. So if anyone wants to look at those sheets, or people who are going down to the US and have business down there can remind their partners. I think we all need to be part of this effort.
We have been here before. In 2018, Donald Trump imposed tariffs of up to 25% on steel and 10% on aluminum from Canada. Canadians did retaliate with tariffs as well on U.S. steel and aluminum. Those were lifted after about 10 months, under a year. Are we in a different position now?
Yeah, I mean, those, again, it's a good example of how those tariffs, they tend to be really bad for both sides. And so I think there's a strong desire usually to find a better way. And in this particular case, Trump has been clear about what it is he's looking for. He's looking for better border security. So I think that we can, there's a lot of room for us to reassure the Americans that we want to be good neighbors. And if there's more to do on our side in order to make that a reality, as I think there's always more to do, that we're prepared to do what it takes to avoid these tariffs. I think that's a strong card that we have on our side.
Do you take that at face value then? I mean, how do you feel about businesses, workers, business owners, people in industries, basically having to look at negotiating now, or looking at the potential for these devastating impacts because of an issue that, on face value is separate from the economy, from trade?
Well, I mean, I don't think any Canadian is waking up this morning saying, gosh, aren't we glad we're in the position we're in? But this is what's out of our control is, Trump's tweeting about what he might do on tariffs. What's in our control is how we respond to that threat and how we respond to that. I think we've got a good track record. I don't think we can use exactly the same playbook, but I think there are elements of that playbook that worked very well. And I'll come back to that Team Canada approach. Just lots of Canadians getting very focused on this. This is probably the number one threat to our economy. Now, we also have some domestic challenges that, independent of this, that we need to deal with, but this certainly puts the importance of a strong economy front and center, and we need to do everything we can to make sure that we're addressing this challenge and making sure that these tariffs don't come to pass.
Okay, let's take another call here. Maya is joining us from Vancouver. Hi, Maya.
Hey, Isha.
Hi, what do you think Canada should do in response?
Well, I don't know. It's a complicated issue, but I was wondering, is that a personal issue for Donald Trump? Because he made a statement in the past that Justin Trudeau is a disaster for Canadians, and I don't know if that's become a personal for him. So if at some point we have an election, we have a change of government, which we're hoping so, and there's a new leadership coming, and maybe, he has a different approach to Canada. Or my second suggestion is, can we have a representative of conservative liberals sitting down the table and trying to deal, because this is a serious threat. And it's not a threat, I think he's going to do it. I'm 100% sure he's going to do that. So how can we do that politically here in our country, deal with it, and then deal with Donald Trump? Because look at Canadian dollar, it's like never been so low. I don't know what's going to happen. We're going to have a terrible recession.
It did dive again to the lowest since 2020 this morning, or following the news yesterday. Maya, thank you very much for the call. So is it something personal when it comes to that negotiation between the Prime Minister and the President-elect, and also who should be at the table? And Maya saying there it should be the opposition party as well. Justin Trudeau did speak to reporters this morning about that call with Donald Trump, and here's what he had to say.
It was a good call. This is something that we can do, laying out the facts, moving forward in constructive ways. This is a relationship that we know takes a certain amount of working on, and that's what we'll do. one of the really important things is that we be all pulling together on this. The Team Canada approach is what works. That's where, putting aside partisanship, that's where I reached out immediately to Doug Ford to agree with him that we would have a First Minister's meeting this week to talk about the United States, talked with François Legault and some other premiers as well. There's work to do, but we know how to do it.
That's Justin Trudeau speaking this morning. Laura, what steps do you want the federal government to take, and as well the provincial governments?
Yeah, I think Maya raised some good questions, and I think whoever is doing this negotiating and is involved in it, I think there are two things that we need to do. I think clearly we need to reassure the Americans that we're serious about being good neighbors. We're serious about border security. We're serious about the things they care about. And I don't think that's a particularly difficult commitment to make. That's not just in the Americans' interest, that's in our interest as well. And the second thing is to remind them of the two-way relationship. Now, at this point in the negotiation, probably it's leaning into that relationship side of it and the reassurance about wanting to be good neighbors and the importance of our relationship. But I do think reminding them again of that they too have some things at stake has to be part of it. And I think that it goes beyond, Maya raised an important point, the relationship between the Prime Minister and the President matters, but there are lots of relationships that matter, and the Prime Minister himself said it. It's a Team Canada approach, and in the last time around, there were former Prime Ministers who were leaning into the relationships they had to help make sure that everything stayed in terms of landed in a good place for Canada. And I think that everybody seems to be kind of getting that message, from Premier Eby to the Prime Minister to business leaders. So I think that's good news. We're doing what we need to start doing to give us the best odds of having it land in the right place.
Maya also mentioned the opposition leader, and Pierre Poilievre spoke to reporters as well this morning.
We live next door to the biggest economic and military superpower in the history of the world. We can fantasize about other trade partners, but I'm interested in reality. We've been fantasizing for the last 9 years, and look where it has got us. What we actually need to do is stand up for our economy by axing taxes, unleashing free enterprise, having a massive boom in our energy and resource production, and standing up for our country against unfair tariffs abroad.
That's Pierre Poilievre, Conservative leader, speaking this morning. Taking your calls, your reaction to the threat from U.S. President-elect Donald Trump that he will impose tariffs of 25% on goods from Canada and Mexico, saying this is about the issues around drugs and migrants crossing the border into the United States. Taking your calls and what you think Canada should do in response. Jim is calling us now from Vancouver. Hi, Jim.
Hello there. Good morning. I noticed that Trump is very keen on trying to stop the border problems. And the border problems are created by Canada and Mexico. Partially, what is happening is they're not stopping the drugs that are coming into Canada. And if Trump and the Americans could see drugs being handled properly here in Canada, where people are put in jail because they get involved with the drug trade, then for a longer terms, I think it'd be much more effective. And we would be showing the United States that we're leaders in security rather than being sort of soft-nosing our way through the problem.
Jim, thank you very much. That's Jim in Vancouver. Premier David Eby, when he was speaking with the BC Federation of Labour Convention this morning, did address those demands, those concerns around the border, specifically with regard to drugs and British Columbia. Here's what he had to say.
We're going to stand together, and we're going to ensure that we negotiate from a position of strength, that we negotiate hard, and we ensure that any decisions that are made are in the best interests of British Columbians and Canadians. There are improvements we can make on our border. We've called repeatedly for example, port police to ensure what comes into British Columbia is not contraband, is not illicit drugs or precursor chemicals. These are things that we can do to make life better here in British Columbia, as well as respond to concerns that have been raised south of the border. But I'll tell you this, we're going to stand together. We're going to stand together as a province. We're going to stand together with employers. We're going to stand together with Labour. And we're going to stand together right across this country and ensure that families are protected here in British Columbia.
That's Premier David Eby speaking this morning. My guest is Laura Jones from the Business Council of BC, the CEO there. Any final thoughts from you on what this might mean for the future of trade between BC and U.S. export customers?
Well, I think there's one thing that's very, very clear. This has now risen, has to be the top priority for the Premier, for the Prime Minister, for premiers across Canada, for business leaders across Canada. And so that in the short term is very, very clear, I think, to everyone.
Laura Jones, thank you so much for your time. Certainly the top story today and lots of reaction coming in. Thanks for sharing yours today.
Thanks so much.
Laura Jones is CEO of the Business Council of BC. It's 12:27 now Pacific time. Lots of emails coming into our bctoday@cbc.ca address. Joseph writes, beyond arguing tariffs, there is one thing most of us would agree with. Justin Trudeau should not be calling the incoming president to discuss the topic. Let's get serious as a country, have a long-awaited election, and move forward. Scott writes, the best way for Canada to respond to Trump-era tariffs is to embrace value-added manufacturing by importing goods from around the world with minimal tariffs, making innovative manufacturing changes, and exporting these improved products to the United States. We can outpace protectionist policies. Gary writes, we are constantly exporting our natural resources to the U.S. Why can't Canadian companies manufacture what Canadians need from Canadian natural resources? And Patricia writes, I was watching your show, and I just have to say that Mr. Trump does not like Trudeau. Also, there are a few senators in the States that do not like him. So more on the personal relationship there. Patricia, thank you very much. Our email again is bctoday@cbc.ca. Much more reaction throughout the day here on CBC television, on Newsnet, on CBC Radio 1 as well, and watch your 6 p.m. news tonight. Much more reaction to this threat from U.S. President-elect Donald Trump that he would impose 25% tariffs on Canadian goods if the issues of border-crossed drugs and migrants is not addressed. That coming from Donald Trump. A lot of reaction today you'll see from all levels of government. This is BC Today. Tad wrote us another email. Not to dismiss the potential of 25% tariffs, Trump has been throwing out numbers out there all throughout his campaign, everywhere from the 10% all the way up to 200%. I agree with being prepared for whatever may happen is smart, but I think we shouldn't be freaking out just yet. That's Tad emailing us at bctoday@cbc.ca. You can send us your thoughts anytime. And thanks so much for joining us here on the show. I'm Michelle Elliott. Very glad to be with you this afternoon. Coming up in our next half hour, we're going to talk about the issue of gender-based violence following yesterday's International Day in recognition of the issue. And there are campaigns going on. One of them from various groups calls on governments to declare gender-based violence an epidemic. So we're going to hear from the YWCA Metro Vancouver. And we're going to ask you, what do you think are the solutions to get to those root causes? And what do you think are the supports that victims of gender-based violence need? We'll have that conversation coming up after the CBC News Update with Robert Zimmerman.
Good afternoon. Premier David Eby says Donald Trump's threat to impose a 25% tariff on Canadian goods will be devastating to workers on both sides of the border. As we've been hearing on the show, the U.S. president-elect says he will sign an executive order outlining the initiative when he takes office in January. Eby believes Canada is negotiating from a position of strength. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau says he plans to meet with premiers this week to discuss how to approach the Canada-U.S. relationship. BC health officials still don't know how a teenager became infected with the avian flu. The teen was reported infected back in early November and remains in hospital in critical condition. The infection is the first human case of H5N1 avian flu in Canada. And Destination Vancouver says Taylor Swift will bring an estimated $157 million economic impact to the city next week with the 3 final concert dates of the Eras Tour. The tourism body says the forecast includes $97 million in direct spending on accommodation, food, and transportation. And now the forecast on the North Coast. A chance of showers this afternoon with a high of 2, highs to -9 with a mix of sun and cloud in the Peace. In the central interior, including Prince George, some sunshine with a high of -10. Highs from -2 to +3 with a mix of sun and cloud in the Kootenays. In the southern interior, including Kelowna, sunny breaks this afternoon with a high of +2 and a chance of showers in the Fraser Valley. A bit of sunshine in Metro Vancouver and Greater Victoria with highs around 7. That's your CBC News update from Vancouver.
Rob, thank you very much.
You're welcome.
That's Rob Zimmerman in the CBC Vancouver newsroom, and much more reaction from you on our email on the Trump tariff threat. Terry writes us, it's not the worst thing to decrease crime transport between countries. Canada needs to consider real charges for anyone caught transporting a gun. The U.S. can contribute security experts and supports like we do when they have a wildfire or flood. The tariffs always about making the wealthy wealthier. We should, and Kathy writes, borders are a two-way street. Drugs, guns, and people go both ways. And Terry writes, we shouldn't cave to Trump but boycott American businesses for December, such as Costco, Walmart, and Home Depot, and calls Trump a bully in this case. Okay, thank you very much for your emails. bctoday@cbc.ca is where you can reach us. And throughout the day, of course, more of your afternoon shows coming your way. Here's Amy Bell with On the Coast.
Hi, Michelle. I'm filling in for Gloria today here on the coast. So we're going to be talking about the area outside of BC Place. So, you know, when they have a Lions game, everybody spills out onto Robson, both before and after the game, and it really creates this fun atmosphere. Well, the City of Vancouver looking at considering a motion to officially designate that whole block as a fan zone. And that means there could be some upgrades to the area to help with community events. So we're going to hear more about that. And we're also going to talk to Burnaby Mayor Mike Hurley. He is going to talk about modular housing and how it could be the solution to easing the housing crisis. On the Coast is on the air every weekday starting at 3, and I hope you will be listening.
Welcome back. You're with BC Today here on CBC. I'm Michelle Elliott. Very nice to be with you. And Make the Season Kind is the new name for our annual CBC fundraiser in support of the 108 food banks in the province. This event is in support of citizens like this.
My name's Lori, and I'm low income. Like, I don't make very much monthly money, so I depend on this place totally 100% to eat, because like my rent, once my rent is paid, I have nothing extra. So, because it goes to bills and to rent completely 100%. So I do depend on here to eat. Yeah, there's just me now, me and my roommate, but it used to be me and my kids. I had 3 kids that when I was coming here. And so it helped them, and they had the meal, their lunches, the lunch program. They would pack like a little, or give for the kids for snacks and stuff like that. So that was totally helpful. Yeah. So
tell me where your kids are now.
They're grown up. Yeah. My daughter's a nurse at Ridge Meadows Hospital. Yeah, my oldest, and my son he's like a courier, and my daughter is she lives in Victoria, and she works at a car dealership in Victoria. Yeah, so they're all older now. I'm so proud of them. Yeah, they did really well. So yeah, they're really kind here. They don't judge you here. and you just get everything you need, and they don't have a problem. Like, you can ask them first if you need something, like extra, if you need like toilet paper or something, you just have to ask them. They've been there for our community, I think, for a long time. Yeah, and they've really helped a lot of people every day. And and I appreciate them. Totally, yeah.
Thank you to Lori for sharing her story. Make the Season Kind is the new name for our annual campaign in support of food banks in BC. Friday, December the 6th, we will have a day of special programming all planned to inspire you to donate to the food bank of your choice in British Columbia. I'll be co-hosting a 3-hour province-wide special edition of BC Today, along with my fabulous colleague, Margaret Gallagher, host of North by Northwest. But you don't have to wait until December the 6th to donate. You can just go to cbc.ca/kindbc, and you can find the Donate Now button. Once you click on that, you'll find the drop-down menu so you can choose the food bank to donate to. Again, that's cbc.ca/kindbc. Click on Donate Now, and you will receive a tax receipt. $12:37 now. Well, we are in the second day of the international 16 Days of Activism Against Gender-Based Violence campaign. Now, that campaign raises awareness on all forms of violence based on gender, much of which goes unreported around the world. BC has the second highest rate of gender-based violence in Canada. The stats are sobering. 48% of BC women from 15 years old up say they've experienced some form of intimate partner violence, with higher rates for Indigenous women and people from the 2S LGBTQIA plus community. Well, we want to hear from you. What do you think is needed to end gender-based violence, and what support do victims need? You can call us 1-800-825-5950, 604-669-3733. You can hit pound 690 on your cell phone. Our email is bctoday@cbc.ca. Now, if you need help, you can call the Battered Women's Support Services crisis line at 1-855-687-1868, or you can call or text Victim Link BC. That's 1-800-563-0808. You can also email 211 victimlinkbc@uwbc.ca. And I'm pleased to welcome to the show Erin Seeley, who's the YWCA Metro Vancouver's CEO. And she's here to talk about a campaign in relation to this now. Hi there, welcome.
Hi, Michelle. Thanks for having me.
Nice to see you. You call your campaign Close to Home. Why so?
This year, as part of the 16 Days of Activism, we wanted to create a way to remind people how pervasive gender-based violence is. It's not isolated in specific neighborhoods. It really is across all our communities. So we have a bus shelter campaign right now across the city of Vancouver in different neighborhoods, places you might not expect it, that shows data, reported sexual assault data, which is one example of gender-based violence. And it reminds anyone who's in the vicinity within that 10-block radius how many sexual assaults were reported. And that brings it to the forefront. In the noise of the media, we don't want to lose sight of this issue, and it's so pervasive and growing that this was a way we thought we could visualize it.
As pervasive as it is based on these stats, is there a lack of recognition?
Absolutely. I think there is a feeling that it's only affecting a certain small segment of the population. And as the data you shared shows, 48% of women in BC will experience it. And that's reported data. And what's important to also point out is we know this is underreported. We hear it anecdotally. We work with so many other frontline service providers that hear that there are many issues that affect someone's willingness to report. This disproportionately impacts women, overwhelmingly so. And as you talked about, there are lots of intersectional issues for 2S LGBTQIA plus people, for newcomers to Canada, racialized people, Black and Indigenous women as well. And so this is something that needs to be at the forefront. It also needs a whole of government approach to address it.
And when it comes to government, you're calling for this to be declared, recognized as an epidemic. What would that mean?
We are, and we're working together in coalition. It's important. We're part of a coalition of over 40 organizations and individuals. With the call to action, we have an open letter asking the provincial government to declare gender-based violence an epidemic. That does a few things. One is it creates a framework in legislation that can be used to have a whole of government multi-pronged approach, whether it's public health, legal, well-being, social supports, prevention, better data collection. There's a whole bunch of issues that can address this and keep it at the forefront. And our call to action is a way for people to also participate. This is a call to the public. Sometimes you feel like on the big issues, it feels like you're powerless, and you're not. And we're asking everyone to sign this open letter.
I imagine it's also hard to recognize when you are among it, and hard to recognize it in your own community, in your own family, in your own relationship. Can you tell us about that? How do you get to that person who needs to hear this message?
I think there's a lot of secrecy and shame still with this, and stigma, and that's also part of why we're bringing this conversation into a call to action. We need to have the data so that it can be addressed in the way that it needs to be. We know people have a lot of concern about what will happen if they report their safety, the safety of their children. If they leave and it's an intimate partner violence circumstance, if they leave a relationship, where will they go? We hear from many women at YWCA. We serve many single mothers who don't want to leave because maybe they could get temporary accommodation, but they fear having to go back to a partner. We also know that a lot of gender-based violence isn't intimate partners. It can be, as per the sexual assault data, incidents that happen through the power imbalance and the misogyny we have in society. And so this isn't an issue only for women. It really needs men's leadership as well. And that's why we've got this call to action.
And we are asking our audience to weigh in. What are the solutions that you think are needed to end gender-based violence? And what are the supports that victims need? I'd love to hear from you. Give us a call, 1-800-825-5950. 604-669-3733. You can also just hit pound 690 on your mobile device. If you'd like to email us instead, it's bctoday@cbc.ca. And I can appreciate that perhaps if you're feeling a little reticent to call in, you might want to email, this is a difficult topic. And so we have an email here asking, typically, the woman or the person being abused leaves. Why aren't the men or the abusers forced to leave and get long-term and intensive therapy, whatever it takes?
I think it's a great point that it's always disproportionately the victims who are at higher risk who need to take the steps. And part of what we're asking for with our campaign is more supports. And that includes supports for men. I think safety is always paramount. And in a situation where you're being harmed, you want to go to where you can be safe. And I really appreciated you sharing the helpline and the information at the beginning. There are resources available. It's important to remind anyone who's in a dangerous circumstance that there is help. And I think this is where we need to have a societal response. This is really a social issue. So it starts with youth, it starts with prevention, teaching healthy relationships, so that when there is a circumstance, it can be addressed, not only punishing the victim, but really recognizing the perpetrator's fault in this, and the role of power in our society. Women often have to leave because they don't have the economic power in a relationship. We meet many women who don't have bank accounts even when they're leaving, and the kind of basic economic means just isn't available to them.
So, I've heard this many times that housing is a big part of this.
Huge housing. Violence can be both a cause and a consequence of homelessness. And we see, especially in Metro Vancouver, where the cost of housing is so high, we know that's a barrier for women leaving. We also know anecdotally that women will tend to have to move multiple times when they're leaving a circumstance of intimate partner violence. They will often have precarity, and they'll be hidden in homelessness. So they'll be couch surfing or living in their car, again, because of those safety issues. So housing is a key piece of a pillar of support that we're asking for as part of this campaign.
Let's give out our numbers again. 1-800-825-5950, 604-669-3733. And again, if you need help, the Battered Women Support Services offers immediate short-term help to survivors, and that crisis line is 604-687-1867. You can also call or text Victim Link BC, and that is 1-800-563-0808. We have an email here. Lisa writes, I don't think this is ever going to stop until more credibility is given to women when they phone and tell police they're afraid, and police say, well, they didn't do anything, so we can't do anything. It also won't stop until kids are being brought up correctly in the family. I think schools, kids should be taught how to treat other people. Well, that's what you were talking about when it comes to prevention. What about the issue of women coming forward to say that they're afraid, and police say nothing? They say nothing concrete has happened.
Yeah, I think believing the victim is a big risk, and it's a fear that women have. Giving them the emotional support to be able to come forward and report something as traumatic as this, and then ongoing support is key. We know that the BC Attorney General, the Ministry of Attorney General is looking at the legal system supports for this. We think there need to be a lot of reforms around how to ensure that people can be protected when they report. And, you know, with the evolution of our criminal code is important to recognize too when there's been financial coercion, for example. We see that federally as an issue. So gender-based violence is not just physical. It doesn't just leave physical scars. It can be emotional, psychological. It can be economic and financial as well.
And we've spoken with Attorney General, who's now returned as Attorney General, Nikki Sharma, about this issue, efforts to bring more education for the justice system when it comes to gender-based violence. What progress? Has there been any progress?
You know, I think we're always optimistic, and we always believe that things like more affordable housing, more mental health supports, the kind of funding for frontline services. BC has a plan called Safe and Supported. It is progress. It's not enough. And we need to ensure that as our population grows and as we have more and more youth needing to find education on how they can have healthy relationships, that we provide those services and supports. There's always more to do, but this is a solvable problem. And that's why we've got this letter and this call to action.
Mm-hmm. And yet it's increasing.
It is increasing.
And
it's increasing.
I mean, that must leave you gobsmacked.
It's, you know, we saw it spike during the pandemic when people were in their homes and they weren't feeling safe to even leave their homes. But I think this is where also the intersection with poverty and with the financial pressures is so important to recognize. With the high cost of living, we've seen more and more people be at risk. You talked about the CBC's work with the Greater Vancouver Food Bank, food insecurity, homelessness. These are all issues that affect someone's ability to be safe. It affects our health and wellness, and it affects someone's willingness to report. So the root causes are what we want to see addressed through the declaration of an epidemic.
Okay. I'm joined again by Erin Seeley, CEO of YWCA Metro Vancouver. They're one of dozens of groups calling for gender-based violence to be declared an epidemic, saying that's what's going to bring legislative changes, program changes, funding support. So we're asking you on the issue of gender-based violence, what are the solutions that you think are needed, and what are the supports that victims need as well? 1-800-825-5950, 604-669-3733. Jane is calling us from the Elk Valley. Hi, Jane. Welcome to the show.
Hi there. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, what did you want to put forward?
Yeah, I wanted to just share a couple of things. When it comes to where do we start and how do we face this epidemic that's happening, one is we really need to start with our men and our boys. There's so much very alarming rhetoric on the internet and in these cyberspaces in terms of the manosphere and red pill, blue pillars, and really a very, very scary shift in terms of misogyny is alive and well. And I think a lot of vulnerable men or, end up on those spaces and go on to be perpetrators. And I think that's something that needs to be addressed. Also, I think the court system really needs to catch up with family law, especially when it comes to emotional abuse and coercive control. Just from experience within my social circle, like we've seen men going on to continue to abuse their partners post-separation through the court system, financially, emotionally, like lying, threatening, and there really isn't a lot of recourse for those men perpetrating that once the partner has left physically the situation. So just wanted to highlight that and perhaps some mandatory training on coercive control, emotional abuse in the court system and better programs to support with that.
Jane, really good to hear from you. Thank you very much. Some very interesting points there on toxicity, toxic masculinity on the internet, and also on the coercive control. And we know we've spoken with the Victoria MP, Laurel Collins, who did bring forward a private member's bill dealing with coercive control, and that is actually at the Senate now. And so that's where that is at. What are what progress has been made when it comes to coercive control?
Well, we see that private members bill. I think the other piece on the prevention side and in relation to the rhetoric, really addressing young in this issue with youth, and it's in a way that addresses not only the breadth of youth perspectives, but the prevalence of social media and the role that it plays in the way that youth get beliefs about relationships and power and control. And I think coercive control isn't just about finance, it's about the use of information and technology. And I think it's about, giving that empowerment to men and boys as well to be calling it out among their peers, being able to be the leader in saying this isn't okay, this behavior. And we see so many examples in the media that are toxic. And I think equally we need to highlight the ones. There's a lot of positivity happening. There's a lot of good work around things like consent culture and recognizing the role that women play. And I always look to Indigenous societies and matriarchies and the role and the way women can be revered in society. And I think that is something we have to address, that power imbalance.
We have Travis on the line from Prince George. Hi, Travis.
Hi, thanks for having me on.
Thanks for calling. What did you want to put forward on this?
Just a couple of thoughts. I truly believe that one of the biggest hurdles to overcome is reinstating or supporting the nuclear family, where really good parents, men and women, can teach their children how to honor one another and show by example, like how to treat each other in a loving relationship. And especially, your last caller talked about masculinity. Well, I don't believe that masculinity has to be synonymous with toxicity. I believe that real men can teach their sons and boys in their community how to be real men with real masculinity without the toxic aspect. I also think there's a lack of spirituality. It doesn't necessarily have to be God per se, but I think that when people feel connection and spirituality, they get an innate desire to treat each other better than without. And then I also think our legal system needs to have harsher penalties for people that are convicted of these horrible crimes. I think that we're too lenient. And I think that if these people that have committed these crimes do desire to become a part of society, there should be a very stringent rehabilitation program where there's no shadow of a doubt that they change their ways before they're allowed back into society.
Travis, thank you so much. Good to hear from you. Thank you for the call from Prince George.
Yeah, thank you.
Take care. That's Travis in Prince George. A lot of different points there. So the family, the role of the family, and we have all different kinds of families, but what is the education that's needed when you're raising a child?
I think it's so true that families are in many shapes and sizes, and I think promoting respectful behaviors between couples, promoting good examples of role models where you can see someone treating others with respect and being open to conversations that are hard. These shouldn't be private conversations. They really should be happening out in the open.
And I wonder how much of it, it seems like so logical and just it should be your first instinct is wanting to treat people with respect, especially people in your own home, you would think. Given this the stress, and you said there's been a spike since the pandemic, when you're undergoing stress, what is the education that people seem to need with regard to how you manage that and deal with it and not become a perpetrator?
I think there's a big awareness now about mental health as a key element of well-being. And I think this is not only for youth, but it's for adults too. And when you add on the pressure, financial pressure, living in our society, there are a lot of ways that mental health supports can be a key solution. And we see this in a multifaceted approach. And I think it's interesting too, your callers coming from rural, smaller communities. This is not an urban issue either. It really is even more pervasive in rural communities where it can be harder to speak up because more people might know who you are. So getting those access to health supports is really critical.
I just have a minute here, but Jessica in Vancouver. Yes, thanks so much for calling.
Hi there. Yeah, I've experienced this both in an urban and rural environment. I'm a survivor of domestic violence, and both times I had a really negative experience with the RCMP. And so I think calling for more training around sensitivity for the police is definitely needed. And this might seem counterintuitive, but also like groups for men, like support groups, because I work in the nonprofit sector. There's been a lot of funding for women over the years, and the men kind of get left out. And, I think that can really impact their ability to be healthy men. So that's what I think should happen in the province.
Jessica, I'm so glad you called, and I'm so sorry that you have experienced this yourself.
Thank you.
All the best to you, okay? Thank you. That's Jessica in Vancouver. Yeah. What do you final thoughts from
I
Erin?
think about, with respect to law enforcement, there's always opportunities for education. We have a blueprint in the 231 Calls for Justice, the Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women and Girls report that's now 5 years old. There are great takeaways there of how we can make progress in this area. So, this call to action, calling gender-based violence an epidemic, really opens up this as a public priority. And we encourage anyone in the public to sign this open letter and to see how these multifaceted areas, whether it's mental health, law enforcement, education, others can help.
I just have 10 seconds left, but have you heard back from the province?
We've had some good engagement initially. We haven't seen mandate letters coming out yet, and we'd love to see this issue be part of a mandate commitment. So it's also not a partisan issue. We're hoping, we've got 53% of the legislature is going to be women, so we're hoping to see support.
Okay, we'll continue to follow it. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Erin Seeley, CEO for YWCA Metro Vancouver.